Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Israel is striking Hamas tunnels. It has killed their top weapons maker in an airstrike, but the US is not on board for its next plan. If Israel occupies Gaza, America says it will strongly oppose it. Meanwhile, corporate giants are getting caught in the crossfire. Nestle and Coca-Cola are being boycotted in the Turkish parliament. Should corporates take a stand in wars? Is there a right strategy? And what is the impact? We'll discuss all of that. In China, 2 more business tycoons have gone missing. We'll tell you about this latest crackdown. In Sri Lanka, the US is lending big money for a port project that involves India. If it works, it could be a game-changing strategy. We'll tell you why. What's the Cold War treaty that NATO and Russia have junked? Why a strike in Bangladesh has plunged the economy into an existential crisis. How Europe is shutting the door on immigrants, one country after the other. How Ethiopia's peace laureate president is hinting at launching another war. And why the Mexican Congress is obsessed with aliens. All these stories and more coming up. The headlines first. Foreign ministers of G7 countries meet in Tokyo. The bloc reiterates its support for Ukraine amid the war in West Asia. G7 says it will continue to support Kiev economically and militarily. Malaysia says it will continue to maintain ties with Hamas. This comes as US lawmakers want to sanction foreign supporters of the group. The Malaysian Prime Minister rebuffed American pressure, reiterating Palestine's right to defend itself. Guess who is complaining about terrorism? Pakistan. It is blaming the Taliban for the rise in terror attacks in Pakistan. Islamabad says there has been a 60% increase in terror incidents and has slammed Kabul for failing to stop this. Delhi continues its feeble and delayed attempts to curb pollution. The state government has banned the entry of app-based taxis from other cities. Only cabs bearing registration numbers of the capital will be allowed to ply in the city. Millions of Australians were left without mobile and internet after a network failure at telecoms firm Optus. The mystery glitch shut down payment systems and caused transport delays. Optus is Australia's second biggest service provider. And scientists say 2023 is on track to becoming the hottest year on record. It is said to be the warmest in 125,000 years. Greenhouse emissions coupled with the El Niño effect has led to this rise in temperature. Day 33, this is what the war looks like. Israel is storming Gaza City. It says Hamas leaders are dead men walking both inside and outside Gaza. Israel is targeting the network of Hamas tunnels. It has also killed a top leader of the terror group. So right after the Israeli Prime Minister spoke about tactical pauses, his army is intensifying the strikes. Take a look at this. Like I said, Israeli forces have killed a key member of Hamas, and this happened today. His name is Mesouin Abu Zina. He manufactured weapons for Hamas. Israel says he was killed in their airstrikes. They're also ramping up their ground operations. The target is Hamas tunnels. Israeli troops are trying to map these tunnels. They're destroying them by planting explosives. And this is the trickiest part of their offensive, because Hamas tunnels are everywhere, all over the Gaza Strip, embedded with civilian infrastructure. They're under homes and hospitals, also an amusement park.
We are here at an amusement park. We found a logistical tunnel here. The tunnels didn't pass through this area. We bombed this now, and we will continue to do so wherever we find these tunnels.
This is part of the Hamas strategy. Use civilians as human shields. Build terror infrastructure in civilian areas, homes, schools, hospitals, so that the prospect of civilian casualties deters the world. But now they're under attack. Even then, these tunnels serve two purposes. One is to launch ambush attacks on Israel, and two, to hide hostages. So Israeli forces have a challenging mission ahead of them. They must neutralize the tunnels by going inside, checking for hostages, dealing with Hamas men, and then finally destroying these structures. These tunnels have been around since the 1980s. When Hamas took power in 2007, it expanded the tunnel network, started using it for military/terrorist operations. So how big is this tunnel network? Hamas says it's 500 kilometers long. This may be an exaggeration. For perspective, the Delhi metro is over 350 kilometers. And the Gaza Strip is barely 41 kilometers in length. So 500 kilometers sounds like a bit of a stretch. Nonetheless, it's an extensive network, and these tunnels run deep, sometimes as deep as 80 meters. Last month, Hamas released some hostages. They were held in the tunnels, and they described them as, quote unquote, a spider's web. So if Israel wants to destroy Hamas, it must demolish the tunnels first. They give it tactical advantage. And neutralizing them will take time. Perhaps the reason why Netanyahu is preparing for the long haul. We told you about this yesterday. The Israeli Prime Minister gave an interview. He was asked who will govern Gaza after the war. He did not give a direct answer, but he did say that Israel will control Gaza's security for an indefinite period of time. And that statement triggered speculation. Is Israel planning to take control of Gaza, to occupy it? Now, the U.S. is concerned. Yesterday, President Joe Biden issued a warning. This is what the White House said. If Israel tries to reoccupy Gaza, America will strongly oppose it.
We don't support a reoccupation of Gaza by the Israeli Defense Forces. Look, we're friends, and friends don't have to agree on every single nuance and every single word. And I don't think it's any shock to anybody that on a political spectrum, they're not exactly always in the same place on every issue.
We don't have to agree on every single word. The statement is telling. Biden and Netanyahu have a long history together and a complicated relationship. When Netanyahu took office, Joe Biden did not invite him to the White House. And this is a tradition of sorts. The US president invites the Israeli prime minister. But Biden took more than 9 months to invite Netanyahu. And then last month, when the war broke out, Biden rushed to Israel. He offered his quote-unquote unwavering support to Israel. His approach has sharply divided America. As Israel dropped bombs on Gaza, Biden faced a barrage of criticism, including from lawmakers in his own party, like Rashida Tlaib. She's a US congresswoman, a Palestinian American. Soon after the war broke out, she released a statement. It had a popular Palestinian slogan. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That's what she said. Now, pro-Palestine groups say this is a call for freedom. But Israel supporters have a different interpretation. They say Tlaib called for Israel's destruction. And the US Congress agrees. Yesterday, American lawmakers held a vote. It was in the House of Representatives. And they voted to censure Tlaib. Now, this is basically public shaming. When a lawmaker is censured, they're made to stand in the well of the House and listen to the Speaker read out a resolution for them. It's essentially a reprimand. The US House rejected Tlaib's statement. But she remains undeterred. Last Friday, she released a video. It accused President Joe Biden of supporting what she called a genocide.
We stand with Israel.
Mr. President, the American people are not with you on this one. We will remember in 2024.
So the Israel-Hamas war is not just about security anymore. It has divided the world. It has divided America. It has become a hot political issue in the US, where lawmakers are under pressure to declare their allegiance. Picking sides is always dangerous, like the Rashida Tlaib learnt. But it's not just lawmakers and governments. Even companies are picking sides, sometimes with major consequences. Let me tell you what's happening in Turkey. Their parliament has announced a boycott. Certain brands have been removed from its cafeteria, like Coca-Cola and Nestle. The lawmakers did not name these companies, but reports say these too have been pulled from the menu. So no more instant coffee, I guess. The question is why? Well, the parliament did issue a statement. Listen to what they said. The products of companies that support Israel will not be sold in restaurants, cafeterias and tea houses in the parliament campus. So that's why. Turkey says Coca-Cola and Nestle are supporting Israel, hence the boycott. And it's not just Turkey. In Malaysia, McDonald's and Burger King are being boycotted. In Pakistan, it's Coca-Cola. And no, it's not actually a boycott. Pakistanis are stealing the drink and then spilling it. Take a look at this. It's bizarre, but you get the idea. What if other Muslim countries do the same? We're talking about a huge market here. Muslim countries are home to almost 2 billion people. So a full boycott would hurt. Which brings us to an important question. What should companies do during wars? Should they pick sides, stay on the sidelines, or try to play a positive role? It's a question that has become more important today because there are two wars going on now, in Ukraine and in Gaza. In Ukraine, most Western brands did pick a side. Reports say more than 1,000 companies have shut shop in Russia. And we're talking big names here like Volkswagen, Adobe, Amazon, Apple, BMW, KFC, McDonald's. All these brands have pulled out of Russia. They may say it's because of principles, but let's face it, it's just common sense. Most of these companies are based in Europe or the US. If you pull out from Russia, you stay in their good books. It's a no-brainer. But with Israel-Palestine, things are a little more complicated. Both sides have leverage. Western governments are backing Israel. The Muslim world is united behind Palestine. It's hard to find a villain here. So what do brands do? Well, some of them have played both sides, like McDonald's tried. Look at what the Israeli division announced. Free meals for 100,000 IDF soldiers plus 50% discount on additional purchases. Days later, McDonald's Oman responded. They donated $100,000 to Gaza. Same company, two sides. What explains this strategy? Well, McDonald's says it's not the company's decision. These are franchises based in different parts of the world. What they do is up to them. How convenient is that? Their branches use the same logo, the same name, the same recipes. But McDonald's says, don't blame us. A few companies have not bothered to play both sides though, or play neutral. Like Ben & Jerry's. They're an ice cream brand based in the US. Last year, they pulled out of Palestinian territories. Why? To protest Israeli occupation. Which brings us back to the same question, is picking sides okay? Well, it's not our place to tell companies how to manage their affairs. But we will say this, consistency is key. If you criticize injustice, criticize it everywhere. A crackdown in the West Bank is wrong, but so are crackdowns in China, Xinjiang, or Hong Kong, or Paris, or Dhaka. Selective outrage is problematic. It exposes your political interests. And we're not saying it's easy. These companies face pressures from different sides, from the governments, from the public, even from their own workers. A recent report talked about workplace friction due to the war. Arab employees feel Palestine is being ignored. Jewish employees feel anti-Semitism is rising. Such issues have been reported at 3 major companies, Nike, Procter & Gamble, and Instacart. At Starbucks, it came to legal blows. A union of baristas voiced support for Palestine. They represent thousands of workers. They call themselves Starbucks Workers United. So guess what Starbucks did? They sued the union for damaging the brand. Like I said, it's a tough call. During conflicts, companies will be caught in the crosshairs. If they want to, they can put their neck out, maybe pick a side, but then be prepared for what comes next. boycott calls, allegations of hypocrisy, and employee rebellions. Vantage continues after a short break.
That over the past 6 days, the people of the national capital are being forced to in fact breathe in severe air category AQI, and hence this order was given to go ahead and open this. This morning the chairman of the DPCC actually came over here and opened the locks of the gates over here, and at this point in time the technical committee and the maintenance committee are inside the smog tower. They are actually figuring out that if at all this smog tower that has been shut for the last 8 months needs any sort of maintenance, any sort of technical the glitch that might have come up, and once these glitches are solved, the maintenance is done, we can expect these smog towers to actually go ahead and start function. So these are few of the steps that are being taken by the Delhi government after the court orders to give immediate relief, to provide some sort of immediate relief to the people of the national capital who have continuously been suffering due to this deteriorating air quality out here. Now over the next few hours, it is expected that once the maintenance is done, once the technical glitches are smoothened, we can expect that these smog towers would start to function. But yes, how much significant is it going to be in improving the air quality, especially out here in the Connaught Place area? That is still a big question mark, and that will be answered once these smog towers start functioning, and we can expect that the AQI might be reduced by a significant margin as well. With video journalist and Satish Essential Singh for CNN News 18. For the 6th straight day, the AQI in the national capital continues to remain in the severe category. Today as well, the AQI in the
Speaking of business owners facing a crackdown, there's nothing like China. In that country, it's par for the course. So when we bring you news of the latest cases, it doesn't really feel like news. It's more of the same. 2 more Chinese business tycoons are in trouble. One is a tech founder, the other is an investment guru. Their names are Chen Shaojie and Zhao Binxiang. Now, Chen is the chief executive of Douyu. It's a streaming platform. Zhao is a business executive. Reports say he works for a pharma company. Now, both are facing a crackdown, and as always, it's not clear why. Why were they detained, and what are they being probed for? Beijing won't say. So we tried to go through local reports and connect the dots. Turns out, Chen's platform is under the lens. That's Douyu. It's a leading tech company in China. Like I said, a streaming platform. From gamers to cooks, everyone uses this platform to live stream to their audience. But recently, regulators scrutinized it. They found pornography and gambling content, and both are illegal in China. So Chen could be in hot water over this. His company is already in trouble. In 2019, it was worth about $4 billion. But after China's crackdown on the tech sector, its value shrank. Douyu's current value is less than $300 million, and more scrutiny will only make it worse. But is there more to this story? Because when business tycoons vanish in China, it usually signals the beginning of another purge. And there's a long list of victims from the recent past. Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba. Bao Fan from China Renaissance. Ren Ziqiang, a real estate mogul. And Guo Guangchang from Fosun International. They're all billionaires. They all disappeared without an explanation, and all of them resurfaced with their reputation severely damaged. The reasons for their downfall were different though. Jack Ma and Ren Ziqiang criticized the state, so they were punished. Others were victims of the common prosperity policy. This is a brainwave of Xi Jinping. He came up with it a few years ago. The Chinese president started a campaign. The idea was to reduce the wealth gap. How did they do it? By redistributing it. That was the attempt. Xi implemented this plan through harsh policy changes. It led to major losses for the rich in China. They were spooked. Soon they started leaving. Last year, China lost more than 200 billionaires. They left the country. This was the biggest such exodus since 2013. It was triggered by Xi Jinping's actions. And this year could be worse. China is set to witness the biggest exodus of millionaires this year. Chinese entrepreneurs are looking for safer shores. Singapore, in fact, has emerged as one of their favored destinations. And Beijing sees this. It is trying to undo the damage. In July this year, China unveiled a new plan. It had 31 action points. The goal was to make business owners feel safe, improve the business environment, and win back the trust of investors. Prominent business owners backed this plan, like Tencent's Pony Ma. In fact, he wrote an entire op-ed about it. And what did it say? Pony Ma declared that he was, quote-unquote, excited and encouraged about Beijing's plans. Lei Jun spoke about this too. He's the chief executive of Xiaomi. And he called the plan, and I'm quoting again, a clear policy signal from Beijing. He said Chinese companies should push high-quality development and help modernize science and technology sectors. But as they say, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And the clearest policy signal from Beijing is this: if you don't suit their scheme of things, they will make you disappear. And they do it with impunity. 2 more high-profile businessmen have gone missing, and they don't even bother to say why. This is the reality of doing business in China. Billionaires disappear, ministers disappear, celebrities disappear, tennis stars disappear, even the Interpol chief disappears in China. Only Xi Jinping and his erratic policies stay. Our next story is from Sri Lanka. A turf war is underway there. Until now, it was India versus China in Sri Lanka, but looks like the United States also wants a peace. Their focus is on the Colombo port. It's being expanded right now. The plan is to build an additional terminal. So the US is pitching in. And we're talking big money here. Washington is lending $553 million. That's more than $500 million. And just to clarify, this loan is not for the Sri Lankan government. It's for a consortium that is building the new terminal, something that US officials were quick to point out.
The priority of President Biden through his partnership for global infrastructure and investment to have high quality, high standard projects that respect local laws and conditions, that are transparent, that don't burden countries with debt at a sovereign level, but instead help finance the private sector. Ultimately, the source of the long-term sustainable capital that will make a difference for development around the world.
So no sovereign debt, which brings us to the consortium. Who is part of it? There are 3 companies and agencies: India's Adani Group, Sri Lanka's John Keel's Holdings, and Sri Lanka Ports Authority. The Indian firm holds 51% of the stake. Now, the US announcement is important for 2 reasons. One, the port's location. Colombo is the biggest port in Sri Lanka. Last year, it handled more than 7 million TEU of cargo. TEU is a unit of measurement. It stands for 20-foot equivalent. And how does Colombo compare with other ports? Jebel Ali in Dubai handled 14 million TEU. Singapore handled 37 million. And Colombo is located between these major ports, Dubai and Singapore. So the potential is immense. It can link West Asia to major Asian economies. Basically, the oil producers to the oil consumers. And that's one reason why the US announcement is important, the location of this port. The second reason is the template. It could be one for the future. Indian logistics, plus local knowledge and clout, plus American funding. This could be the answer to China. No debt trap, no hidden Chinese agenda, a win-win deal for all. It's not a new template though. India and the US have been planning such projects in the last couple of years. For example, the I2U2 in West Asia. It's the same strategy. America brings the money, India brings the logistics and manpower, and the local players lay the groundwork. But will it be enough to contain China's influence in Sri Lanka? Well, not yet. The Colombo port has Chinese investments too. The latest was announced in May this year. A Chinese company is building a logistics complex at this port. Total cost? Around $400 million. Plus, China already runs a terminal at the Colombo port. So India and the US are playing catch-up. And they're playing together. Last month, a Chinese research vessel docked in Sri Lanka. Both the US and India criticized it. They feared it was a spy ship. Same with the IMF bailout. New Delhi has backed the financial package for Colombo. The US too has supported its economic recovery. And this is a big policy shift for America. Because in the late 2000s, the US was not happy with Colombo. This was during the Sri Lankan Civil War. Washington accused the government in Sri Lanka of rights abuses. So they cut off military aid. But in the last decade, things have changed. All the focus was on the Indo-Pacific. So Sri Lanka became important. 30% of global oil traffic passes through their shores. Also 90% of China's West Asian oil. Hence America's interest. But investing or lending money is not enough. You must answer two key questions. One, can you deliver on the investments? And two, can you replicate it elsewhere? China failed on the first count. Most of their big investments in Sri Lanka are white elephants. They have not turned a profit. So India and the US need to do better. And when they do, they must replicate it elsewhere. China has port projects all over the world, in Myanmar, in Bangladesh, in Africa. So one terminal in Colombo will not be enough. At best, it's a starting point. Developing countries will be watching this project closely. How it turns out could sway their decision on new projects. For our next story, let's go back in history. The year was 1990. The Berlin Wall had fallen. The Cold War was ending. So Russia and NATO signed a landmark pact. It was called the Treaty on Conventional Armed Forces in Europe. It was a security agreement. And here's what it said. Russia and NATO won't build forces at each other's borders. It was important to avoid conflict between the Cold War rivals. But now that deal has been junked. Moscow has formally pulled out of it. They called it, quote-unquote, untenable. So NATO has suspended the pact. It says Russia's exit makes the treaty unsustainable. Do you know what this means? The war in Ukraine is eroding the gains made after the Cold War. Here's a report.
The early 1990s were an optimistic period for the world. The Cold War was over, the Soviet Union had collapsed. It brought a sense of hope, peace, and along with it, a new world order. Russia-West tensions looked like they were a thing of the past. This was supposed to be the decade of cooperation and diplomacy. So Moscow and NATO signed a security pact. It was called the Treaty on Conventional Armed Forces in Europe, also known as the CFE Treaty. At that time, this was a landmark move. It set constraints on conventional arms and equipment. The purpose was simple: prevent military build-up at mutual borders and help maintain peace in Europe. 32 years after this was signed, Russia invaded Ukraine, so all bets were off. Moscow mobilized its forces, and so did the NATO. Europe was on the brink of war once again, a war that the treaty hoped to prevent. So what exactly went wrong? This treaty was quite unpopular in Russia. When it was signed, Moscow had the upper hand in weaponry, so to give away those gains didn't make sense. And it seems like Moscow regretted it too. In 2007, they suspended participation in the treaty. In 2015, they mentioned their intent to withdraw. But this year, they've finally done it.
Show the result. For 405, against no, abstentions no. The federal law was adopted unanimously. Colleagues, I congratulate you.
Moscow has formally pulled out of the Cold War treaty. Russia blames two things for this: the United States and NATO's expansion plans. NATO, on the other hand, has condemned this. It too has suspended participation. A majority of NATO's 31 members signed this, including Poland, Romania, Hungary, and Slovakia. And this isn't the first treaty Moscow has pulled out of. It's unlikely to be the last. Last week, Russia pulled out of a nuclear test ban treaty. Before that, the US backed out of a nuclear forces treaty. It shows you the trend. Russia-US tensions are undermining key arms treaties. All of these pacts were signed in the late 80s and 90s. They were a sign of easing tensions, a sign of trust between the East and the West. But that no longer seems to be the case.
What is needed right now is more transparency, more risk reduction, more what we would call guardrails on competition. We basically need to manage the competition so that it doesn't spiral into crippling arms races, crippling in terms of cost and instability. And we need to manage the risk of unintentional escalation and unintentional conflict.
So after 33 years, is it back to square one? The gains made after the Cold War are eroding. Moscow-US relations are at an all-time low. There's a war going on in Europe. The West has sanctioned Russia. Moscow remains on the offensive, and the world remains on edge.
Bangladesh's economy is facing an existential crisis. And that is not an exaggeration. The country's garment workers are on strike. Around 600 factories are shut. Exports are slowing down. And there is violence on the streets of Bangladesh. At least 3 people have been killed since last week. There are riot cops patrolling Dhaka. They've used tear gas and batons to drive back the protesters. But why are they striking in the first place? For better wages. Right now, garment workers make $75 per month. That's the minimum wage, $75. It was set back in 2018. This year, the government revised it. Their first offer was $90 per month. The factory workers said, not enough. That's when they began protesting. So the government came back with a new offer, a 56% hike, which comes to around $113. But once again, the workers rejected it.
In this inflated market, it's a travesty to the workers. It's evident that in the new wage proposal, our government and the owners only looked into their own interests, ignoring the fact of how the workers will live at this time. We, the Garment Workers Movement and 4 million workers reject this proposal.
So what do the workers want? Their demand is $208, around 3 times their current monthly wage. The question is, will Dhaka relent? They've got many factors to consider here. For starters, this is an election year. In fact, there's an election next year, in the next few months. They can't afford to antagonize such a huge voting bloc. At the same time, companies are watching. We are talking about fast fashion giants here, like H&M, Gap and Zara. Why do they make in Bangladesh? They do it because they know it's cheaper, because labor costs are less compared to other countries. That's the differentiator for Bangladesh. But strikes can put them off. It leads to production delays, export issues, and of course, bad headlines. So Dhaka has a tough decision to make, and they need to make it quickly, because the garment industry is the lifeline of Bangladesh's economy. If it stays shut, the economy slows down. Just look at these numbers. Garments make up 85% of Bangladesh's exports. They contribute 28% to the GDP. And they employ around 4 million people. Most of them are women. This industry is part of Bangladesh's success story. It put the country on the map. So resolving this strike should be priority number 1, which brings us to the workers' demand. Why now? Well, inflation in Bangladesh is pretty high. It was 9.9% in October. Food prices were up more than 12%. So the workers say, we need more money.
Do you see the price of potato and onion in the market? The new hike will not compensate for the deficit of our needs. It should be raised further. We have to pay rent, food, and children's education. The market economy is on fire. How can we go on like this?
The workers want more than $200. How does that compare to garment workers elsewhere? We looked at the major producers like China, Vietnam, and Turkey. And here's what we found. In Vietnam, the minimum wage is around $150. In China, it's around $217. And China is the world's largest garment producer. Bangladesh is second. In Turkey, it's around $350. And in Indonesia, it's $181. So they are better off than Bangladesh at this point. But I guess that's obvious. If not, why would companies come to Bangladesh in the first place? So let's look at wages within Bangladesh now. Here's what the International Labour Organization found in 2019. Minimum wage was just $48. It was the fifth lowest in the world. But like I said, for garment workers, it was set at $75. What does that mean? Either companies are not paying the legal minimum in Bangladesh, or garment workers are better paid than the rest. We don't know which one, but either way, it's not ideal. Chinese garment workers make 3 times the Bangladesh minimum wage, yet they remain the biggest producers. So Dhaka must find middle ground. Workers need relief from the relentless inflation. At the same time, the country needs more investments. It cannot be a choice between the two. It should be a balance. Vantage continues after a short break.
In nearby regions is above the 400 mark, which means that the air that we are breathing in continues to remain toxic. Currently, I am reporting from the iconic Akshardham temple, and if I could show you in the visuals over here, the entire area over here has been engulfed with smog and toxic haze. This is the toxic smog that we are forced to breathe day in and day out, and you can see in the visuals over here how this thick layer of smog has engulfed the entirety of the national capital today as well. The situation has remained in the severe category for the last 6 days, and IMD predicts that over the next few days as well, the AQI is likely to remain in the severe category itself. So yes, there is no sudden relief that will be seen by the people of the national capital, who are now running from pillar to post just to get a grasp of fresh air. But a silver lining happened yesterday, where the Supreme Court finally came on record and came down in fact heavily on the states, especially in North India, and asked them to chalk out a plan which would eventually mean that this menace of pollution that the people of Delhi and North India have to face year in and year out, a concrete plan is made out so that a solution can be found to this menace. But yes, at this point in time, politics continues over it. But yes, people of Delhi are still scared, as this AQI and the air that we are forced to breathe in continues to remain toxic. Until when it will remain toxic, that is still a very, very big question mark. And at this point in time, what also remains to be seen, if at all our governments, after the Supreme Court came down heavily on them, can finally get their acts together, sit on a table and chalk out a concrete plan, because of which we can do away with this menace of pollution that the people of the national capital have to face year in and year out. The people of Delhi are continuously facing this health hazard that has come up because of the rising pollution levels out here in the national capital. Yesterday, the Supreme Court finally took cognizance of this entire situation. After the hearing that happened in the Supreme Court ordered the Delhi government and Delhi Pollution Control Committee to go ahead and open these smog towers that have been closed for the last 8 months. The main accusation was that this does not affect the air quality out here, and that was the reason why this was closed. Because remember, this entire smog tower was built at a cost of rupees 22 crores, and it took almost rupees 10 lakh per month to maintain this smog tower. But since the air quality in the national capital has deteriorated to such a level that over the past 6 days, the people of the national capital are being forced to in fact breathe in severe air category AQI, and hence this order was given to go ahead and open this. This morning, the chairman of the DPCC actually came.
To Germany now, which is making headlines for a U-turn. This is about immigration. Germany now wants tougher immigration measures. Chancellor Olaf Scholz announced it. This was after a marathon meeting with German state leaders. They've come up with new rules. They'll make it easier for Germany to deport migrants. And it's a far cry from Germany's old policies, pro-refugee policies, implemented by former Chancellor Angela Merkel. And Germany's case is not unique. It's part of a larger trend we are seeing across Europe. On Monday, Italy proposed a migrant plan. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni is shipping them off to Albania. Migrants will wait in Albania while their asylum applications are being processed by Italy. Meanwhile, the French Senate is also debating tougher immigration bill, a tougher bill. And then, of course, there's the UK. They started it all with their ship to Rwanda plan. So everywhere you look, Europeans are shutting the door, trying to outsource their refugee problem. Here's our report.
Olaf Scholz has struck a deal. He's found a way to appease leaders in Germany's 16 states. After hours of discussion, this is what he came up with.
I don't want to use big words, but I would like to say that I believe this is a historic moment as we sit here. In light of an unquestionably huge challenge with very large numbers of migrants and irregular migration, we have managed for all levels of the state to closely cooperate, which is necessary.
What exactly is the historic decision? It seems to be undoing the past. Germany has been seen as a welcoming country for refugees and asylum seekers. This was because of the policies of former Chancellor Angela Merkel. She opened the door for people trying to escape conflict zones and other unsafe places. And she's been blamed for all that followed. Europe in general and Germany in particular are seeing a surge of immigrants, people fleeing war zones and poverty around the world. The EU promised to be humane to asylum seekers, but it wasn't prepared for the rush. So now the bloc is slamming the door shut, one country at a time. Germany will reduce support for migrants. They'll have to wait longer until they're eligible for healthcare, funding and other social services. It's a bid to make Germany less attractive for immigrants. And Germany's far from the only European country doing this. Italy has been at the forefront of the European migrant crisis. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni says it's a victim of geography, becoming the first port of call for migrants who brave the Mediterranean. Her solution? Change geography for the migrants. Instead of staying in Italy when they land, migrants will be packed off to a non-EU member, the Balkan nation of Albania.
The agreement consists the fact that Albania will give Italy opportunity to use some areas of the Albanian territory in which Italy can create at its own expense under its jurisdiction 2 structures where it can set up centers for the management of illegal migrants. These facilities will initially be able to accommodate up to 3,000 people who will remain in these centers.
The centers are supposed to become operational next year. They will house up to 3,000 migrants, which is almost nothing compared to the number of people reaching Italy. Meloni says their asylum applications will be processed in a month, and only one center will house migrants at a time. So she expects to hold 36,000 asylum seekers in Albania every year. Is this legal? The UN says it is, provided some rules are followed.
First, that all the rights provided by the Conventions on Refugees and Human Rights are respected by the concerned countries. And second, that these transfers must not become a shift of responsibilities as far as refugees' protection is concerned. They must instead become an enhancement of a shared responsibility.
Who will check if Albania respects human rights? Will the EU ensure that Italy doesn't abdicate responsibility? We'll find out in a few months. On the face of it, Europe seems to be doing everything it can to shift the refugee burden elsewhere. France seeks to deport people who are a serious threat to public order. That could mean anything. But they'll make an exception for people who work in sectors with labor shortages. Basically, people willing to get exploited at minimum pay. Then, the UK is trying to send migrants to Rwanda in Africa. British courts have struck down this plan, but the government is appealing the decision. Even if it loses, there will likely be other deportation drives. It seems Europe's anti-immigration push has just begun.
Now let's turn our attention to Ethiopia. It's an East African country of about 120 million people. They've just celebrated 1 year since the end of a civil war. A war between the military and local militias. The Ethiopian forces are under President Abiy Ahmed. The local militias were in Ethiopia's northern Tigray region. The war ended last year, but it was not a peaceful year for Ethiopia. Another conflict began. In fact, it's still on. This is in the country's Amhara region, again between Abiy Ahmed's forces and local militias. Meanwhile, floods have devastated the other side of the country. At least 20 people have died and thousands have been displaced. So calling this chaotic would be an understatement. Let me ask you a question instead. What would you do if your country was constantly beset with turmoil? Whatever your answer, it won't match the president's. Abiy Ahmed is a Nobel laureate. He won the Nobel Peace Prize. In the last few years, he's led 3 wars and now he's hinting at a 4th one. He's been drumming up tensions. This time with all of Ethiopia's neighbors. It started with his statements on the Red Sea. Abiy Ahmed wants access to it, the Red Sea. Slight problem though. Ethiopia is a landlocked country, one of the most populated landlocked nations in the world. And Abiy Ahmed feels that geography is hurting his economy. So what's the solution? Take a port from a neighbor, it seems. He hasn't made an open threat yet. Ahmed says he wants to strike a bargain. And what's his offer? Shares in valuable Ethiopian assets as payment for a port. Also, he doesn't seem to be willing to take no for an answer. He has made public speeches in recent weeks all about getting a port. He talks about it in a televised address and even to business leaders during forums. He apparently told them that the military option was on the table, that they would use force if required. Reports say Abiy Ahmed told this to local business leaders, but he denies it publicly. He says he does not want another war, although his rhetoric says otherwise. Let me quote from what he said. The lack of port access was, quote unquote, a potential source of future conflict. It does sound like a threat, and it's being seen as a threat by all of Ethiopia's seafaring neighbors. But one country is more alarmed than the others, and that's Eritrea. Some 30 years back, Eritrea was part of Ethiopia. Eritrea gained independence in 1993. It shares a bloody history with Ethiopia, its former overlord. They were locked in a border conflict for almost 2 decades, and that conflict ended months after Abiy Ahmed came to power. The irony is inescapable. Abiy Ahmed won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2019 for resolving the border conflict with Eritrea. And now he's pressuring the same country for port access, also hinting at conflict should he be denied. Eritrea has called Abiy Ahmed's request, quote unquote, excessive. They say it has, and I'm quoting again, perplexed all concerned observers. But Abiy Ahmed believes that access should be given on historical, geographical, ethnic, and economic grounds. Those are his words. Let me explain this. Here's the historical argument. Long ago, Ethiopia controlled the entire Horn of Africa region. Abiy Ahmed also quoted a 19th century general. He said the Red Sea was Ethiopia's natural boundary. There was also talk about people-to-people ties. But Abiy Ahmed's main point seems to be economic. He says no country can see rapid progress without access to maritime trade. And he cited UN studies in support of this, about the lack of sea access. It says lack of sea access reduces a nation's GDP by 20%. Now, currently, Ethiopia has to rely on its neighbor Djibouti for sea access, and it comes at a huge cost, more than $1 billion a year. President Abiy Ahmed says this is unsustainable, which is why he wants a port for his country. Now, there's some weight to this logic in the economic arguments. But if we are talking about economics, he seems to be forgetting the cardinal rule. War is bad for business. Ethiopia's president should know this better than most. He has fought wars since coming to power, 2 wars. A 3rd conflict is underway. Thousands have been killed. His country is reeling from war exhaustion. And amid all of this, what does he plan to do? Ramp up tensions over a port. So we have to ask, when is the right time to rescind a Nobel Peace Prize? because for Abiy Ahmed, it should have been years ago. Now let's turn our attention to Mexico, specifically the Mexican Congress. It is supposed to be a solemn federal organ, a venue for discussions on serious matters, like the Category 5 Hurricane Otis. It devastated Mexico just 3 weeks ago. It killed dozens of people, destroyed 200,000 homes. But that's not a topic of discussion in the Mexican Congress. They'd rather talk about aliens. Yesterday, they devoted hours to Jose Jaime Maussan, a self-proclaimed UFO researcher, the same controversial character who presented so-called aliens in the month of September too. That hearing only resulted in a multiplication of memes. And now Maussan is back with a supposed new species of aliens. Here's a report.
Aliens, non-human beings, extraterrestrial bodies. The vocabulary is extensive, so call them what you want. But they exist. We aren't saying this, of course, and science hasn't proven it either. But according to this man, aliens have been discovered. This is Jose Jaime Maussan, a UFO researcher. A self-proclaimed and controversial one, may we add, but more on that later. Yesterday, he captured the attention of Mexico's Congress. He presented lawmakers with X-ray images to showcase a new species of so-called aliens without lungs or ribs.
It is part human, related to the monkey family, but it also has unknown DNA. So could this be a product of nature, or was it really made by someone else?
He claims the species were once alive and now their dead bodies were found in Peru. He pressed the case for non-human beings. He shared a wealth of information, but declined to certify that the remains were extraterrestrial. How anticlimactic. The session didn't come to a conclusion on whether aliens exist or not. But one thing is clear. Maussan's perseverance is noteworthy. Winston Churchill once said, "Success consists of going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm." If we were to let our imagination run wild, Jose Jaime Maussan has probably taken this quote to heart. Maybe he has the quote plastered on his bedroom wall, because he just refuses to give up. In September this year, he presented 2 shriveled bodies as specimens in front of the Mexican Senate. He claimed they were aliens from Peru and that the remains were 1,000 years old. What was the result? Researchers distanced themselves from Maussan's conclusions. Experts call the exhibition shameful. The swift backlash only birthed an abundance of memes. One said it looks like a kid got a D- in pottery class. Another equated it with the morning after a night out in your 30s. Quite entertaining. Also, not the worst part. In 2017 too, Maussan made similar claims. That was in Peru. He showed ancient alien bodies, but the prosecutors found those bodies to be dolls, not aliens, and recently manufactured, not ancient. They were covered in a mixture of paper and glue. Points for creativity, but nothing more. So the international community of scientists doesn't have much hope for Maussan's claims this time either. And the ridicule is not limited to the controversial researcher. The Mexican Congress devoted hours on so-called aliens' bodies, on a man who has been proven wrong again and again. They did this instead of talking about Mexico's smorgasbord of issues, like the migrant crisis, the escalating violence in northern Mexico, or even the aftermath of a record-breaking, devastating hurricane. It seems as if the Mexican government is trying to escape real-world issues by talking about supposed outwardly beings. If that's true, much like Maussan's theories, this plan may not work.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In China, cities clean up after days of unexpected blizzards and snowfall. In Australia, a fiery tornado whipped through an outback property in the country's north. And in the United States, a family got their food delivery stolen from the porch. Turns out the thief was a bear. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1895, a German scientist discovered X-rays. The first X-ray image that he took was of his wife's hand. The discovery was termed as a medical marvel, becoming an important diagnostic tool in medicine. We're leaving you on that note. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Very warm welcome. You're watching Breaking on CNN News 18 with me, Akanksha Swaroop. Let's dive into this segment with some breaking inputs coming in. As far as Mahua Moitra, the TMC MP, is concerned, we're now learning that there have been damning findings of the Home Ministry in its report, part of the Ethics Committee draft as well. Mahua Moitra, the MP, had visited Dubai apparently 4 times, but her Lok Sabha login credentials were used from Dubai 47 times. And the Ministry of Home Affairs has informed